Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by the all-new and very exciting Super Learner Academy. Now, Super Learner Academy is the home of my premium level content and masterclasses from my course on accelerated learning, speed reading, and memory, all the way to my course on productivity. Now, in these masterclasses, I go into the gritty detail that I just can't go into on the podcast or in the books or in the other online courses. I offer the worksheets and the homework and the types of individualized attention that can only happen in my own platform where I control the learning experience. So if you want to learn faster, if you want to remember more, if you want to read faster, and you want to be able to do this all with a cohesive 10-week program that's going to take you from wherever you are today all the way to certifiable super learner status, I want you to check out the exclusive discount that we're offering for podcast listeners only at jle.vi/learn. That's jle.vi/learn. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's show. If you guys are familiar with really any of my work, you'll already know that I am a huge fan of nootropics, otherwise known as smart drugs or cognitive enhancers. I love it when people say that, cognitive enhancers. Now, I've used them for years. I've experimented with dozens of them, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of this rapidly growing trend in biohacking. I think it's something everyone should experiment safely with. I think it's something that's really going to help us reach our potential as humans and as learners. And so for that reason, today's treat is a very, very special guest. And he's the host of an entire podcast dedicated solely to nootropics. Now, like myself, he lacks a medical degree, but does share a passion for self-experimentation and broad-reaching research. I think you're going to be just blown away by how much knowledge he has on the subject, on the way the brain works, on the different chemicals and compounds. Really, he's done hundreds of experiments on himself, and he's even developed a number of nootropic stacks in his own company. Now, in this episode, we talk about a lot of the nitty-gritty details of the various compounds and nootropics and how they work. We also talk about diet and nutrition. We talk about self-experimentation. We talk about where to get started and where to try these different substances safely and how to do it in a way that you're not going to damage yourself or hurt yourself. We also go into polyphasic sleep and so much more. I really enjoyed recording this episode, guys, and I just know you're going to enjoy it as well. I particularly enjoyed the opportunity to dive into the mind of another dilettante neuroscientist like myself and really to demonstrate to the audience that you don't need a medical degree to safely and effectively tweak your cognitive and physical performance. Now, I do want to give a big disclaimer here with that, which is my guest and I are not NOT, we are not doctors, and we're not qualified to give you medical advice. So please consult your doctor before taking any of the tips home and trying them out. And of course, we can't take responsibility for your results. So be smart out there, guys. Be safe. I don't want any of you guys to do something that's going to harm you in any way. Now, with that said, I think you're going to be very excited to try some of the things in this episode safely and intelligently. So, ladies and gents, no more further blabbing. Let me present to you Mr. Jesse Lawler of Smart Drug Smarts. Mr. Jesse, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. It's a pleasure. You know, I just wrapped on my masterclass and we did a little bit of stuff on nootropics and dealing with, you know, which ones are good, which ones should you try. So I'm actually excited to expand my own knowledge on nootropics because I'm a huge enthusiast, something that I use almost every single day. And I'm excited to hear what I can learn, and I'm sure our audience is as well.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's a super exciting field. And obviously, it's something that's gaining a lot more public attention in the last couple of years, which is pretty exciting also.
Absolutely. So why don't we backpedal really quickly and just tell me a little bit about how you got into this. I saw as I was researching your bio, we've both kind of foregone the traditional medical training, and it's something we definitely don't hide. And I think that's a recurring theme. I think most of our guests, whether they're talking about nutrition or they're talking about exercise, they're not coming from a medical background, and they're more N=1 kind of self-experimenters. So tell me a bit about how you're qualified to do what you do and how you got into it.
Yeah, well, I'm a computer programmer by training. I mean, that's sort of what I've done professionally. And probably about like 9 years ago, I think, I haven't actually gone back and looked at when I was first sort of exposed to the idea of smart drugs. But it became something that I just sort of got interested in professionally as a tool in my own personal toolkit. And yeah, kind of started me down this road probably about 3 years ago when I first started my podcast. I wanted a way of sort of calling up some people and asking questions that as a private citizen, I didn't really have a way of doing. But I was like, wait a minute, if I were to start a podcast, then it kind of gives me a little bit of an excuse to get my phone calls returned. And it actually works, is the funny thing.
It totally does. I'm constantly shocked and a little bit appalled by the people who give me hours and hours of their time repeatedly, hey, want to come back on another episode? Yeah, heck yeah. It's amazing. And
yeah, it's a good hack. It's a
great hack. It's a great hack if you have the time to put into it. So that's really cool. So tell me where you went from there.
Well, basically, it's been a series of about 3 years and a little over 100 episodes now of calling up people and asking them questions. And a lot of the people have been, research scientists working at universities. Some of them have been other self-experimenters. We've talked with people about everything from Adderall to lucid dreaming. And so probably I'd say about like 50% of the episodes are sort of on the core topic of smart drugs and actual, things that you put in your mouth that affect your brain. Mm-hmm. But others are just things that it's kind of like, the What Jesse Finds Interesting show. And, anything that's going to affect cognition one way or another, even if it's not necessarily a, pharmaceutical or a nutraceutical compound, I've sort of considered fair game for the show.
I love it. And I hear a lot of that also in myself. I mean, today I interviewed, I don't know if it's going to come out before or after this episode, but I interviewed a mentalist, and this guy actually read my mind on the show. I was like, this is like, the show's about superhuman abilities, so it's loosely connected. But I was like, this is totally just because I'm so fascinated by this guy. So in any case.
Did he read your mind effectively?
He did. I'll send you the episode when it's out. It actually blew my mind. I was like, there's no way. And then he did it. And I was like, oh my God. What just happened?
That's weird.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. But in any case, so let me come back a little bit on topic and say that, most of our audience, I think, is very familiar with the idea of nootropics or smart drugs. So I guess we'll skip the definitions and, jump into what you said, which is the reason I wanted to get you on this call is to ask you questions I'm curious about, selfishly enough, right? So I want to know, what have you learned about nootropics since you got into this? Which ones have you tried? Which ones work? I mean, we'll get into all that, but what are some of the big things that you've learned?
I guess probably like my single biggest takeaway has been like the level of variability of what one person feels overt, physiological or perceptual effects from that somebody else might not. There really does seem to be a large amount of person-to-person difference, which in retrospect, I shouldn't have found that as surprising as I did because, all of us are different, everything from different blood types to different diets to, different, genotypes and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think that the brain is probably even a little bit more variable than other parts of our body. It's like, all of our body parts, organs, bones, whatever, are defined by our genes and then to a certain extent by our environment and our diets and things like that. But our brains are this, we call it a plastic organ, not like a plastic made out of, Barbie doll parts or whatever, but that it's an organ that sort of gets defined even in its internal layout by what we do with it. What we learn from the time that we pop out into the world. And basically the brain, I think they say, is still really developing pretty actively until, your early 20s,
right?
Which is pretty amazing. So one person's brain structures can really wind up quite a bit different. I mean, even when you get down to like the differences between left-handers and right-handers than another person's. And so I guess in retrospect, it shouldn't have been so much of a surprise that something that might have a strong perceptual effect for one person doesn't for another. But that's been one of my main takeaways, that it really is valuable for people to try a handful of different things and do a little bit of the N=1 experimentation to find out what's going to be effective for them.
Exactly. And, I felt a little bit weird putting that as the, when you do this kind of masterclass lecture, and you want to give people the simple prescription. That's why they're there. And ultimately what I came up with after hours and hours of writing this and researching it was you kind of got to try a lot of different things. Because, for example, Piracetam does zilch for me. I mean, almost nothing.
Yeah.
Which is shocking because so many people are raving about Piracetam and Aniracetam. It does nothing for me. And it's exactly what you said. I bought some of this stuff and I was like, this does nothing. I gave it to one of my buddies. He's like, this is unbelievable. This stuff gives you such clarity. I'm like, what? Are you sure? I mean, so tell me about that. I mean, which ones have you experimented with? I imagine you're going to say all of them. And which ones have worked for you?
Well, actually, no, it hasn't been all of them because there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things that people sort of put under this, cognitive enhancer umbrella. And I guess we might want to take a second and sort of distinguish, I guess, the term nootropic from cognitive enhancer is a somewhat more general term.
Exactly, yeah.
The actual dictionary definition from the guy who coined the term nootropic is pretty restrictive. I mean, there's a lot of things that definitely might make you more focused for a handful of hours or whatever, but you wouldn't consider a nootropic because they also have some downsides, like they can be physiologically addictive and things like that.
Exactly, yeah. Coffee isn't even a nootropic, as they say.
Right, yeah, by that definition, because you build up a tolerance to it, which crosses off the nootropic nomenclature right there. And it certainly can be addictive as well. But yeah, to get back to your question of what are some of the things I've tried, it's probably, the first thing that I ever heard of and tried was modafinil. I've subsequently tried the other things in the afinil family, armodafinil, adrafinil, which are very similar as far as perceptual effects. Sulbuthiamine, which is a synthetic compound of vitamin B1, tried that. Fish oil, I wouldn't consider that a nootropic, but it definitely is a cognitive enhancer. Fish oil, krill oil, those omega-3s are an essential building block of your physical brain structure.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea to make sure that you're fully loaded up on those. One of the things that always surprises people when I sort of list this one is nicotine. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life or chewing tobacco or any of that stuff, but I've actually applied a nicotine patch to get nicotine into my system. Nicotine has some interesting cognitive enhancing effects that a lot of people would never even think to try. But one of my favorite episodes actually was Dr. Neil Grunberg, a pretty early episode, I think in the 20s, and just talking all about the things that you probably haven't heard about nicotine. But that is an interesting one. And I'll every now and then I'll just put on a half a nicotine patch. One whole patch is a little bit too much for me, but kind of mix that into my rounds.
That's really interesting. I do want to come back to that. I want to come back to how you decide, you wake up in the morning and how you decide which nootropic. But really quickly, let me ask, can you break down for us? Modafinil is kind of in this gray area as far as I understand. It's not a scheduled, prohibited, controlled substance like Adderall or methylphenidate or something like that, is it?
Yeah, it is. And actually, I hope I don't have the terminology wrong, but like Adderall and methylphenidate are not scheduled drugs. Scheduled drugs are things like cocaine and heroin and stuff like that, like drugs that you will truly be arrested if you have. Then there are other drugs that are, and again, we're talking about U.S. laws here. It varies country to country, but that are prescription drugs that you're supposed to have a doctor's prescription to have. And I think that, you'll get some sort of wrist slap if you're caught without it, but it's not like police aren't going door to door looking for people that have their neighbor's modafinil or whatever.
Sure.
Nor their neighbor's Adderall. But yeah, modafinil, armodafinil, Adderall, Ritalin, those are probably the main ones that are considered within the cognitive enhancer overall umbrella, but that are prescription-only drugs that you really should have a prescription if you're using them within the U.S.
Right. My question, though, was more that I understand that people can just order modafinil from India, whereas Adderall or Ritalin, that's not making it through customs kind of situation, and you really do need to go see a doctor? Or is it the case that I can go down to my doctor and he may prescribe me modafinil as opposed to Adderall?
I think that most doctors, you probably wouldn't have to do a huge amount of arm wrestling with them to get you a modafinil prescription if you wanted one. I mean, they prescribe it pretty easily for things like shift work disorder. If you're like, hey, you know what, I have a job where I work until midnight and I have a hard time staying up late at night. I mean, technically, modafinil is something that's supposed to be prescribed for narcolepsy, for people that are falling asleep in the middle of conversations. But I've spoken with doctors that say that probably only about 20 to 25% of the actual prescriptions that are written for that purpose. It's prescribed for all kinds of things.
Exactly. I mean, the original name or the kind of trade name of it is Provigil, which kind of gives you the indication that it's really meant for keeping people awake, whereas Adderall or Ritalin, that's something that's meant more for focus and attention.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true.
Interesting. Okay. So let's jump back real quick. You were saying some days you may try a nicotine patch, some days you may do this. I also tend to, there's certain kinds of work that I may choose yerba mate over black tea. There's certain kinds of work that I may choose huperzine A over another drug. How do you differentiate, say you have, like I do, a drawer of nootropics and you wake up in the morning and you say, okay, you kind of move your hands together and say, what's today going to look like? What kind of work am I going to do today? How do you make that distinction, and which nootropic do you find for you personally is suited to which kinds of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that I like the modafinil, armodafinil compounds for when I want to do like a deep focus. Like if it's a computer programming day for me, when I just kind of know that I want to, put on some music, put on the blinders, not be doing emails, not be really communicating with people, but just kind of go into like a deep focus mode for a long time. And, maybe I get up to pee if I'm lucky, but that's sort of the extent of where I'm varying my activities for a while. For something like that, I find that, 100 milligrams of modafinil or like, something like 35 milligrams of armodafinil is about right for that sort of behavior for me for the day. If I'm doing something that I do want to be more, creative and, maybe shifting between tasks, but feeling engaged and sort of more fluid, their Piracetam was really the one that I came around to. And one of the reasons that I built the stack that we sell, our Stack Nexus, is sort of focused around Piracetam, is because I found that to be a good compound that sort of wakes me up, but also makes me kind of feel creatively engaged. And one of the things that Piracetam is known to do is sort of increase your working memory, which essentially means you can hold more ideas in your head at one time. And I think that some of the reasons I was getting like this perceptual feeling of being more creative is probably just because I had more ideas that I was able to hold in my head at once and sort of juxtapose up against one another, which is sort of the essence of creativity.
Bingo. You nailed it right on the head. That's another thing that we kind of covered in our masterclasses. Like, actually, people don't understand, but so much of creativity revolves around memory. And modern academia has tried to say, no, we're not teaching memorization, we're teaching creativity. Well, what the hell do you think creativity comes from?
Yeah, I mean, you need to have like a bunch of puzzle pieces on the table before you can be creative and like build your own puzzle. I mean, maybe the puzzle is not the right analogy, but it's like that. That's one of the things that, I like reading books and stuff so much. You just get like lots of different ideas that you can then, juxtapose up against one another and hopefully come up with something new.
I love that. That's such a brilliant metaphor. I want to come back also a little bit about the Adderall and the Ritalin and stuff like that, because I kind of recently went public on the TEDx stage and talked a little bit about how I spent most of my adolescence and young adulthood on Ritalin. And it sounds as though you are an advocate of, the kind of modafinil, the prescription route, which I have nothing against, obviously, given my background. But I wanted to ask, for people who are out there and they're not sure, should I be going the Piracetam over-the-counter route? Is this something that I should be talking with my doctor? Where do you think all the pieces fit together, and where do you stop saying, look, I'm going to try these kinds of the Onnit or the Nexus Mitogen product, or go to my doctor and say, look, I have a serious problem?
I guess there's the major distinction to be drawn is that like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's a thing. It's a real diagnosable thing. And it's a spectrum disorder. It's something that where you can have a little of it or you can have a lot of it. But the way that these focus enhancing compounds like Adderall and methylphenidate, known as Ritalin, that they work in the brain of a person that has ADHD, it's having some fundamentally different effects. It sort of allows those people to focus to the level, and I'm going to sort of use the word normal person with my curly quote fingers in the air,
sure,
but it kind of lets them focus to the amount that a normal person would already be able to. And it can really be a life changer for those people if they're unable to kind of, control their own attention to the extent that a normal person might be able to. Now, if you're not on that spectrum, like I'm not an ADHD person, I think probably any more than any other person is. And I've tried methylphenidate on 2 occasions now. Basically, a friend gave me 2 pills. I tried one of them for an episode of my show, and then I took another one a month later, and just because I had it. And the effect I got was really, really strong. I mean, it kind of felt like I was trying to, run too much power through my, voltage cables or whatever.
How much did you take, out of curiosity?
I think it was a 26 milligram extended release capsule, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so like an Alza, something like
that.
Yeah.
That was what it was. I mean, it was my friend's prescription. My friend just prescribed and had it. And basically, he gave me 2 single-day doses of what his prescribed amount is.
Right. That's a pretty good dose. I mean, that's a dose, for someone who's developed a bit of a tolerance.
Yeah, it felt like too much for me. I mean, if I were to do it again on purpose, I would definitely probably maybe, cut that in half. But I sort of wanted to see what it was like because it's something that we'd done a couple of episodes on and people had asked me a lot of questions about it. And I just kind of felt like I needed to test the bathwater so I could have more of an opinion. Anyway, so long story short is that when somebody who's not an ADHD person takes one of these, dopamine enhancing drugs or drugs that basically makes more dopamine be circulating within your brain, it has a really strong effect that is not analogous to what a person is getting who actually has a prescription.
Right.
I don't think I could go to a doctor and say, hey, doctor, prescribe me Adderall without just lying through my teeth, get them to do it.
Right. Adderall is a pretty serious drug. As you said, it's not a scheduled drug, but, I always tell people, look, it helped me very much. But the doctor who prescribed it to me when I was 15 knew me since I was 8 days old. This doctor knew me, knew my family history, knew that my family doesn't have a history of a drug addiction. I mean, I was very fortunate and made sure, by the way, every month I had to go and check in and kind of demonstrate how many pills I had left, which I think these drugs are single-handedly the most abused drug among people under the age of 30 right now.
Yeah.
Forget about marijuana. Like, you want to talk about people having really a drug addiction. Let's talk about Adderall. And it goes under the table because the side effects are really good grades and kids that behave themselves.
Right.
But it's a very abused drug. So it definitely, for anyone in our audience, if you're thinking about that drug, proceed with caution and just be smart about it, please.
Yeah, and I mean, it is an amphetamine compound, so it's inherently quite addictive.
Exactly. Although I do have to say, my mother used to quote, after about 6 months of me finally going on medication, I think it was maybe about 8 years too late, but my mother was afraid to kind of medicate her baby. She started telling people, I was so against it, but now I think they should put it in the water.
Oh, no.
It's unbelievable. I don't recognize my own son. So yeah, if you do need it, it can make a world of difference.
It's funny how much stuff really is in the water too now, because you probably read about this, how there's so many trace pharmaceuticals that are literally in the water supply because the molecules are smaller than gets cleaned out by the water filtration systems at water cleanup plants.
Right. I'm so thankful that I live in Israel because we kind of lead the world in desalination. So a large part of my water has not been drunk for hundreds of years and is not full of pharmaceuticals, thank God.
It's raining outside where I am right now, and I'm thinking I should probably put a rain barrel out just to catch some rainwater instead.
To prevent. Yeah, absolutely. So I also saw that you experimented with raw food veganism, and I want to touch on that because you did say that your show is about so much more than just the things that you kind of pop under your tongue, if you will. And I noticed that you ended up switching to paleo, a man true to my own heart. So I wanted to know about that experience and what happened. Because, we had Rob Wolf tell his story about how he was sick and feeling like death and had stomach pains. But I think you're going to come at it, if I predict correctly, from a little bit of a more, here's how I felt upstairs in between the ears perspective. So what happened with the raw food veganism?
Yeah, so this was interesting. I mean, I got to plead guilty. Like, I like doing self-experiments. I've always just sort of been a fan of like, hey, what happens if I tweak this part of my life and
you and me
see where it goes. So I'm a fan of like evolutionary history and all that stuff too. And I came across the argument, which is not a terribly strong argument, that, we have all of these genes in common with, monkeys and stuff like that. And of course, humans are the only animal that cooks their food. Humans tend to have pretty rotten physiologies compared to most things in the animal kingdom nowadays. It's something like, 30% of the US is obese and 60% is overweight. And, we have all these nasty things that happens to us that seems to make us sort of unhealthy outliers in the animal kingdom. And one of the other things that makes us unique in the animal kingdom is that we cook our food. And, so the argument goes among people that profess to follow raw food stuff that, you know what, everybody agrees, regardless of where you are on the nutrition spectrum, that, fresh vegetables are healthy, that fresh fruit is healthy, and yada, yada, yada. So what if you just only ate that stuff? And so I kind of figured that I would just experiment with that for a while. I went for a month or two and went completely raw and felt a lot of good benefits from it. Well, I should say I felt a lot of good benefits from the diet that I probably misattributed to the rawness. In retrospect, I think it was probably because I was cutting out things like processed flour and processed sugar and things like that, which are not raw. But, I think getting those things out of my diet is probably where I was getting the majority of the benefits. After a while, though, when I went for a few months doing it, then it became kind of a personal challenge. Like, can I actually pull this off for a full year? And would the physiological benefits that I felt in the first couple of months continue to accrue over the course of that year? Would I be, jumping over buildings in a single bound 12 months in? As it turns out, I wasn't. I mean, the benefits sort of plateaued after a while. But I did kind of want to get my 1 year badge. And I wound up, I think, going for something like 13 and a half months. And then my girlfriend at the time convinced me to have a burrito. And so I had a burrito after that period. But I'd crossed the threshold. And at that point, I sort of downshifted into merely being a vegan. So I was still a vegan, but I was no longer a raw vegan. And being a raw vegan, by the way, basically means you're a fruitarian. In order to get enough calories, you're just eating a huge amount of fruit. So, if you have like the people in the audience that are used to eating a lot of fat or people on ketogenic diets, this is the complete opposite of that. You're getting like 96% of your calories from fruit sugars when you're on this diet. So I was a vegan for probably 6 or 7 years. And literally, I got turned off of that slowly by having read a book a couple of times that I found really compelling, a book on human evolutionary history called Catching Fire, How Cooking Made Us Human. And this is a book by he's a professor at Harvard named Dr. Richard Wrangham. And he makes a really I found it compelling, a persuasive argument that it was the introduction of cooking into sort of the human lifestyle about between 2 and 1.5 million years ago. They don't have it pegged exactly when we made that transition, but that sort of started the dominoes falling from us, being Australopithecines with a brain a third the size of what we have now, to being current Homo sapiens. And when I read that and kind of, bought into his theory of how those dominoes fell, thinking, okay, well, we've been eating, cooked food for the last 2 million years, give or take, and a large percentage of that cooked food has in fact been cooked meat, then how am I really justifying eating a diet that does not include any meat at all? And, I wasn't a vegan for any sort of, animal rights reasons or anything like that. So basically, I just started thinking, well, maybe I should do like a 90-day experiment and see how I feel eating, a paleo diet, which sort of is what is implied by the logic in this guy's book. It's not a diet book at all. It's just kind of thinking, okay, if this guy's right, then what should I be eating? Paleo seemed like the closest match. And so, probably about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I gave myself a 90-day experiment into paleo and basically just decided to keep with it after the experiment.
Awesome. So did you notice any kind of cognitive or kind of psychological learning benefits?
Ooh, no. I mean, cognitively, I really didn't notice a big difference. Although I guess the one thing is, eating less meals that were essentially carb bombs. Like when I was eating as a vegan, but not as a raw vegan, I was having a lot of things like, vegetarian spaghetti and stuff like that, where you're getting, high glycemic index stuff just dumped into you all at once. And of course, that makes you want to, curl up on the couch and take a big snooze for a couple hours to digest afterwards. When you're eating more paleo stuff, you don't tend to have those, massive glycemic index bombs. So sort of you maintain a more of an even state, I guess, to your cognition. But I didn't find it to be like a massive shift in how I thought day to day or moment to moment.
Yeah, I think probably you nailed it on the head that you had this benefit in how much energy you had and how you felt when you just cut out all the crap. And so switching to paleo was probably not that huge of a shift for you.
It's funny. It's like the standard American diet is probably about the worst way that a person could eat. And so any direction that you vector off from that center point is probably a good move.
That's awesome. Jesse, you said that you're an avid self-experimenter like myself. I want to know a little bit about the crazy experiments you've done and how they turned out. I'm looking for some exciting stuff to try in 2016.
Okay, well, let me give you a cautionary tale then. Have you heard of, I'm sure you know about sleep hacking, and you've probably heard of polyphasic sleeping. Are you familiar with the Uberman sleep schedule?
Oh, God, don't tell me you tried.
I tried it. I mean, I read some stuff about this. I thought it sounds a little too good to be, it just sounds way too good to be true. It's like, wow, I can be cognitively sharp and only sleep whatever it is, 3 hours and 20 minutes a day is what it comes down to. And so for people who haven't heard about this, basically the idea is that the most cognitively important part of your sleep is your REM sleep, where you're dreaming and your brain kind of resets itself and blah, blah, blah. And normally we don't get into REM sleep until about like 90 minutes into our first sleep cycle, and the REM becomes more common throughout the night. But according to the people that preach the Uberman sleep schedule, if you sort of sleep starve your brain, your sleep adjusts, so you go very, very quickly into REM sleep, and you can sleep for basically 20-minute blocks throughout the day every 3 or 4 hours, and you'll just go straight into like 20 minutes of REM, you pop back awake, and you do that again. So you never really have a night, you never really have a day, you just have these 4-hour blocks that you need to sleep 20 minutes of them.
Right.
Which, it sounds preposterous, but there are people on the internet that claim they've done it, they claim they've lived this way for years, and really? That yeah, but the funny thing is you can't find them. It's like I've tried to get them on my podcast to interview them. They're like, okay, tell me about this.
Yeah, they don't seem to have time, despite the fact that they only sleep an hour and 20 minutes a day, right?
Yeah, it's pretty suspicious. So
I've never heard of anyone beating 3 weeks. 3 weeks seems to be like the max.
I made a really solid run at it. There's a guy named Steve Pavlina. He's a big blogger, and he's one of the people that has talked about having done it successfully for a while. And, I read his long descriptive blog posts on how he went about it and how he prepared for it and got into the system. I read it like 15 times, got on the exact diet he was eating, did, just buy the book, and canceled all my appointments and stuff for like 2 weeks, just thinking I was going to be a zombie and probably wouldn't be able to get anything done. It was literally by like 5 or 6 nights in order to stay awake, I was standing on one foot, just like rocking from one foot to another. Because even if I stood still upright on both feet, I would have fell asleep on my feet. I needed to like rock from one side to another, just like a zombie, in order to not fall asleep. It was totally ridiculous. Anyway,
that's terrible. I used to believe in the concept, but the more I learn about the brain and also just the body, I mean, we've had so many guests on our show who talk about hormones, who talk about muscle repair.
Yeah.
It's like super simple stuff. We're advocating in a lot of shows, high intensity workouts, and you're not going to do that kind of hypertrophic repair in 20-minute sessions.
It was fool's gold. I was totally chasing fool's gold.
Totally. But I will say I am a biphasic sleeper.
Yeah, biphasic is a different story. I think biphasic can be very, very long-term sustainable, and actually might be something that really lends itself to human physiology. Exactly. Because it was kind of, when we were sleeping in caves, somebody needed to get up and tend the fire and things like that. It was kind of useful that during the long winter nights when people would, go to bed when the sun went down and wake up when the sun came up. Exactly. If you've got 12 hours of darkness because you're in like far from the equator, somebody does need to get up during that time.
Right. And from a learning perspective, I mean, if you're breaking down the migration from short-term memory to long-term memory into 2 chunks, I always tell my students, like, I can read a book in an afternoon, but I immediately need a nap after that, because that's so much to go into your short-term memory. And so I just pass out. And actually, we had Dr. Kirk Parsley on the show who said, one of my tricks for accelerated learning, and he was talking specifically about jujitsu. He's like, after I have a really hard training session, I go to sleep. And then people are shocked at how quickly I learn things because I'm just moving it into long-term memory very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think building up the skill for napping is just an amazing hack.
Oh, yeah.
It's like if you can drop into a nap in 5 or 10 minutes, pick up some 20-minute naps throughout your day. If you have a workplace that allows that, or just, go out to your car, duck into a broom closet, whatever it is,
exactly.
that can be a giant hack.
Exactly. I always love to tell people that. And so many people fight me. They're like, oh, well, you're an entrepreneur. You can afford to do that. I'm like, so can you. I developed this habit when I was in business school. It's not exactly professional to like go into the library and dip off, but I did it every single day.
Yeah. If you've got a car out in the parking lot, just sneak out there and, throw the window shades up and grab a nap.
Exactly. Jesse, I wanted to ask you on the nootropic topic. I mean, we did cover, that everyone needs to kind of experiment with this stuff safely. Disclaimer, safely. But where should people begin? Besides, of course, a visit to the doctor, make sure they're healthy, get the thumbs up. But how would you go about starting? What are maybe some of the substances you would start experimenting with? And how would you go about doing it in a way that's safe and kind of intelligent?
Yeah, great question. I think there are some things that probably, almost anybody should probably start supplementing with if they're not already. Omega-3 fatty acids are something that are not well represented in most people's diets and are really useful for your brain. But that's not necessarily something people are going to count as like a nootropic, or they're not going to feel a perceptual effect from having that in their system. You're not going to be able to say whether you had those in the morning or not. Well, okay. So you mentioned piracetam, and I think the racetam family of compounds is probably a really great place to start for a lot of people. For some people, there are strong perceptual effects. For some, there are strong perceptual effects for some racetams, but not for others. I think for most people, they'll be able to find something within the racetam family that does work for them. And there are several. There are, piracetam is the oldest one. Aniracetam, oxiracetam, I think are numbers 2 and 3. And there's a great variety of those compounds now. The newer ones have not been nearly as well tested, and I probably wouldn't really recommend people are going into those ones early.
Sure.
Noopept is another one which has been pretty well studied. It's a Russian compound, but it's been well studied over in Russia, and I think is pretty well tolerated. The racetams are found to be well tolerated by humans. You can't really hurt yourself overdosing on them.
Right.
Oftentimes they'll have what's called a loading period, so you need to have them for a few weeks in your system before you'll really start feeling anything perceptually.
I was going to say, because I definitely experimented with the piracetam and I felt nothing, and people have since told me there is a loading period that you really need to take it every day for a month even to get the benefit.
Piracetam is one that the loading period for piracetam involves like a lot of piracetam too. There are some compounds that we mentioned, methylphenidate, that like 26 milligrams is a big deal for one day. But piracetam, people take like 2.4 grams per day.
Wow.
During their loading period. The normal size pills that people take multiples of per day are 800 milligrams. So it's kind of a horse pill. It's sort of a big thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, the racetams are probably a good, safe place to start. They're sort of in this weird, like, legal gray zone within the U.S. In the European Union, they're like prescription medication. And in the U.S., they're kind of nothing. You can buy them. They're not considered food because they're synthetic compounds that have been invented by humans. They've never gone through the FDA just because nobody's paid the, $50 bazillion to put them through FDA testing. And at this point, for the older ones, nobody ever will because they're already old enough that they would instantly be generics and be available as generic compounds the moment that they got FDA approval. So it doesn't really make any sense for any of these big companies that would normally be financing putting a compound through the FDA to do it because there's no money to be made. So they'll probably sort of always be in this weird nebulous gray area within the US.
Sure.
But you can easily get them. I mean, they're not hard to buy.
No, not at all. Let me ask, are these compatible or are these either or if someone is taking a prescription like a modafinil or an Adderall or Ritalin?
That's a great question. I'm thinking about the answer there. I know that I'm trying to think of the counterindications for the racetams. If somebody is on a blood thinner, I know that that's something that they probably shouldn't do a racetam with, certainly not without consulting with their doctor first. I don't think that there's any counterindications with methylphenidate or Adderall that I know of, but again, before mixing with any of those prescription compounds, I would really check with a doctor first because, they're powerful things. The most important thing that people want to remember, and this kind of goes back to what you learn in high school, is don't mix stimulants with sedatives ever. It's like then you're kind of pulling your body in two opposite directions at once.
That from Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, exactly. But most people are going to find the racetams to be somewhat physiologically, mentally stimulating, and certainly the dopaminergics of something like Adderall would be the same thing. So you're not going to have that physiological seesaw, but I think, like you said, it really makes sense to check with your doctor before using any of these powerful compounds in concert with one another.
Totally. Jesse, what are some books or resources that you found particularly useful along the way?
Oh, gosh.
Or episodes of your show that have been
really self-promotional.
No, please, by all means.
My podcast is probably a really useful way to start for people if they're curious about a certain compound. Just, go to the smartdrugsmarts.com website, and the search box, type in the chemical that you're interested in and see if we've done an episode on it yet. And of course, if you find something that you want an episode on that I haven't done yet, drop me an email and say, hey, Jesse, we really want to hear about X, and I'll see what I can do. But that's been one of the reasons actually I've sort of done the podcast, my own self-serving purposes of being curious about these things and wanting to kind of go to the horse's mouth, the people that are studying these, because a lot of the information that's available on different nootropic compounds on the web is, sales sites from people that are selling stuff, which isn't to say that it's not accurate, but, you always want to take that with a grain of salt because, everything sounds great when it's on a sales page.
Right. That's a nice quotable too.
Yeah. As far as books and things, there's a book called, I I think it's just called Smart Drugs. Actually, our very first interview guest on like episode 1 of our show is a guy named Dr. Ward Dean, who wrote the book, I think Smart Drugs and Compounds or something like that back in the 80s. And I think they've updated that once or twice. But yeah, there's a ton of information on PubMed, that Public Medical Information Directory online. If somebody wants to like read the actual, scientific journal entries and things like that, that's not typically very accessible for most people. I think, many people's eyes are going to glaze over when they read that. So yeah, looking around on the web, and my podcast is probably not a bad place to start, is probably a good way of sort of getting a somewhat like a science-y but non like layperson accessible breakdown of some of these compounds and what they do.
My first step after we get off the phone, I'm going to download your episode on Piracetam because I feel like maybe I need to give it another chance. So I think that's actually where I'll start.
We actually just did episode number 105 was an episode about the racetams. So we just literally came out last week. It might not be last week by the time this episode publishes, but yeah, check that one out. We talk about piracetam, aniracetam, and oxiracetam in that episode.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I'm going to definitely do that. Jesse, I want to ask a similar question, which is, we had Gretchen Rubin on the show, and she said something that I really loved, which is, every successful person has at least one guru. So hers was, this woman who lived 250 years ago in a monastery. Mine is probably Tim Ferriss. I wanted to ask you, who's your guru, or who are your gurus?
Well, Tim Ferriss has done so many things. I wouldn't be surprised if he's lived in a monastery too. But
right.
Yeah, I'm happy that I'm allowed living or dead because, one of the things I think about historical figures is even though there's so many awesome people that are alive doing awesome things right now, when you can kind of look back into history, you can see the full span of people's lives, and it's not necessarily about what blog post did this person publish last week, but over the course of their 75-year life, what were the most important high points that I can draw the most information from? Personally, I got to go with Churchill. I'm a giant Winston Churchill fan. That's because awesome. He had this combination of features that I like so much, which was that he was a tremendous fan of like history and species and sort of like the majesty of what people are capable of. And then he took that information that he was like a passionate lover of and actually participated in, the history of his own time, and being able to like be inspired by his own past and then participate so thoroughly in his own present, I just think is a really inspiring life for a person to have.
That's a really solid guru. He even has the Buddha belly, so that's a solid one.
Yeah, he certainly does.
That's fantastic. The next question I wanted to ask you, Jesse, is about, I saw that you guys now have Nexus and Mitogen, which are two different nootropic stacks that you guys offer. And I wanted to ask, what makes them special? What did you not see in the marketplace that kind of caused you to say, let's make our own? And why are there actually two different ones? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, they're really sort of aiming at two different things. So Nexus is our cognitive stack. It's aimed specifically at the brain. My favorite of the racetam compounds is aniracetam. And so we kind of thought, okay, if we want to build something around aniracetam, what might it be? And so it wound up being a 4-chemical stack. It's got aniracetam, something called CDP choline. It's oftentimes smart to stack a choline supplement along with a racetam because racetams make your brain use up choline faster.
Oh, interesting.
Piece of data choline? There.
That's new to me.
I believe choline might be it's a precursor to acetylcholine, which is a major neurotransmitter within the brain.
Right, acetyl-CoA.
Yeah, making sure that you've got enough of that to be flooding the pipes when you need to is pretty important.
Right.
And then phosphatidylserine, which is something that's naturally occurring within the brain, but you can kind of top up your supply of to some good benefits. And finally, a compound called pycnogenol, which is a really powerful antioxidant, among other things. It's a plant-derived compound. We put those 4 things together in Nexus. Like I said, I wanted something that was sort of a super version of aniracetam that had some complementary compounds in it and essentially could combine several different things that I had in my medicine cabinet into one pill that I could take a couple of times a day. So that's where Nexus came from. That one was, again, based solely around cognitive stuff. Mitogen, the mito in Mitogen, it comes from mitochondria. Right. And that stack is based around, basically promoting mitochondria within your body, both making you build more mitochondria and helping them to do what they do. So mitochondria, quick, cellular biology lesson. Within every cell in your body, you've got these, cellular subunits called mitochondria, which make a substance called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate.
Yep.
And that's sort of the gasoline for your cells. It's what your cells use internally to power their operations. It's generally glucose within your bloodstream, but then intracellular level, it's ATP that gets used. So mitogen is basically 6 different things, 5 of which are chemical precursors to the ATP that your mitochondria produce. And then there's something also called bio-PQQ within there, which promotes the growth of new mitochondria within your body. So it's more of an overall physiological stack, but with a big asterisk there, because there's one thing that's very true of the brain, is that your brain, pound for pound, uses more physiological energy than any other part of your body. It's something like 2% of your body mass, but 20 to 25% of your energy requirements.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's such an energy-intensive organ, giving your brain more access to these little energy power plants is a really powerful thing. And then also one of the compounds is something called sulbuthiamine, which I mentioned earlier. It's a synthetic a dimer, so basically a double-bonded vitamin B1 bonded onto itself. It passes through the blood-brain barrier easy because it is double-bonded, and therefore it passes through like a nonpolar compound. Yeah, basically, some people take sulbuthiamine by itself as a cognitive enhancer. It also happens to be beneficial for the mitochondria, but you kind of get a twofer there, in that one of the primary components of mitogen is a nootropic on its own.
Right. And are you taking both of these every day? Are you taking them together, or you take them separately?
I take mitogen every day. I don't take Nexus every day because, like I said, I switch hit between things. I like to, generally one day a week, I will do a full fast and not have anything, no vitamins, no calories, just nothing, just a full body reset.
Yep.
And the other 6 days, when I am eating food and vitamins and all that stuff, I'll have mitogen every day. It's just sort of an overall physiological thing. And then on the days that I'm not doing any modafinil or armodafinil, I will almost certainly take Nexus. But I generally don't mix those two, not for any particular reason, but just because I kind of like to feel the difference. And I'm afraid that if I take the exact same stack every day, that I kind of lose that sense of variety.
Sure. Have you played around with Huperzine A at all?
I think I've taken it on a few occasions. I've never really felt it, which isn't to say that it's not doing anything. It's just not doing anything that has sort of crossed a perceptual threshold for me.
Sure. Yeah. For me, I don't feel it during the day, but when I go to bed, like, wow, vivid, lucid, insane dreaming.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which is really super fun. So, all right, I know we're running a little bit long here, Jesse. I did want to ask you one more question, which is, and I think we might have just answered it a little bit with Nexus and Mitogen, but if you were to create a $100 brain optimization quick start kit, and you could put anything in it from books to prescription medications, you could include blog posts in there, you could include podcasts, even illegal substances, what do you think you would put in?
Well, I thank you for mentioning Nexus and Mitogen there, but if I only had $100 to spend, there's just so much awesome free stuff that you could put in a brain optimization quick start kit, and things that, dollar for dollar are going to be less than any particular supplement. So I was thinking, probably number one, quick, easy, cheap is a sleep mask. Buy yourself a sleep mask, keep it in your pocket, keep it in your backpack, whatever. Take these naps that we talked about. I think there's an old book called The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. It's actually about a, what was it? It was I forget what psychedelic he's even on in it, but it's an amazing book about the mind and how malleable it is and how our consciousness can be altered. And, whether you're a psychedelic drugs fan or not, but probably particularly if you're not, it's an amazing read by a really, really gifted author that kind of makes you think big questions about just what is possible to do with your mind. I kind of feel like it's literally a mind expanding book that is sort of, I think for many people will make them want to be more curious about what the possibilities with their own mind are. I think there's also some great scientific thinkers, Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, watch some YouTube videos of these guys, get inspired by what, really smart people can talk like and think about. And like when I hear one of these guys that just, their brain is, flowing out of the screen.
Right.
It makes me want to push my own brain as far as it can go.
Absolutely.
Another really cheap and easy one on my list. I actually thought about this, like, what can I fit into $100 is a cork. Next time you're thinking about, drinking some alcohol, put a cork in your wine bottle. Stop drinking alcohol. It's a cheap and easy hack.
Yes.
I know everybody likes alcohol, but dude, it is not worth the trouble.
It's so bad for you. It's so bad for you. Also, your endocrine system, like you want to have success with the ladies, skip the glass of wine,
Yeah. It's amazing to me that, like, reading some of these articles, like kids are taking, methylphenidate on college campuses. I'm like, kids are binge drinking and puking their guts out every Friday night on college campuses, and they've been doing it forever. And because it's a common part of the culture, we act like it's not hurting them. It's like, this stuff is a known dangerous neurotoxin, and people shouldn't be so blasé about it.
Exactly. It's like, this article came out about processed meats being a carcinogen. And it's like the list of things that are known carcinogens in the same level will blow your mind. And I'm pretty sure alcohol is one of them. Alcohol is actually group 1 carcinogen, right? I forget. Yeah. I think it was the processed meats were also group 1, but it's like, it's up there and it is a neurotoxin. So yeah, I don't either drink alcohol or obviously, smoke or any of that kind of stuff. So
good call. One of the more interesting interviews that I've done was a professor from the UK named David Nutt, a really interesting guy. We were talking about just sort of the insanity of drug laws there and here and what's illegal versus what isn't. And he's a guy who got in a lot of trouble and got kicked out of a position that he had as sort of the drug czar of the UK for saying that horseback riding is more dangerous than MDMA use, which statistically it's true. It's like you're far more likely to have an injury that will ruin your life from riding horseback than from using MDMA. Just statistically, I mean, that's a true statement. But anyway, it was a very unpopular thing for him to say at the time. But he made the great point that during the big anti-MDMA push that went on in the UK a few years ago, there were billboards and things like that, the financiers for that were the local alcohol companies. It wasn't like, the government was putting up these billboards. It was the alcohol companies, and that they wanted to maintain a legal monopoly on intoxication.
Yeah.
There's a natural human drive, I think, to alter your brain chemistry every now and then. Intoxication is something that everybody's curious about. And there's money to be made there. And right now, alcohol companies, for the most part, have a legal monopoly on it, and they're willing to, bend the science however they want to maintain that monopoly.
Exactly. Yeah. I thought it was really interesting. I recently watched Narcos and I was researching, you get into one of these Wikipedia offs and you're researching, who are the wealthiest drug dealers of all time. Well, it turns out Al Capone was right up there. And if you adjust for the time value of money and inflation, he was really high up there. I mean, many, many billions of dollars. Yeah. And it just goes to show you, I mean, alcohol just happens to benefit from legality, but it's not very different from cocaine in terms of danger. In fact, I would argue there are more deaths because of it, If you want to go back to historical drug dealers, you can talk about like the Dutch East India Company and read about like the Chinese opium wars and things like that. It gets really crazy. It's pretty interesting. And I think you touched on something very basic and innate in our human nature, which is everybody wants to alter their state of consciousness. That's why kids spin around in circles and that's why they love sugar. It's human. And it's really, I think my biggest takeaway from this episode is it's about choosing which states of mind you want to be in, and when and how and to what extent that differentiates smart drug use. And I mean that, pun intended, smart, intelligent drug use from stupid drug use.
Yeah, and making sure that it's something that your brain can bounce back from. I thought your point about huperzine A and enhancing your dreams, I mean, that's a great one. But I mean, you come back from that and the next day you wake up and you feel fine. It's anything that's leaving you with a hangover, whether it's an alcohol hangover or some other physiological equivalent of a hangover, you should really be wondering if the temporary up spike is worth the down spike in reverse.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So Jesse, if people want to learn more, I imagine you'll have us send them to smartdrugsmarts.com. Is that correct?
I'll do you one better. I was going to set up a landing page for you at smartdrugsmarts.com/superhuman, and we'll put some links there for maybe our top 5 episodes or things that your audience might find interesting.
I would love that because it'll help me having to sort through, because I definitely want to listen to some of these episodes myself. So ladies and gents, Superhuman Nation, check out smartdrugsmarts.com/superhuman, and we'll put that in the show notes for you guys, save you a little bit of typing as well. Jesse, it's been such a pleasure, my friend. It's such a pleasure when I find someone who shares such a passion and such an interest in so many of the same things as I do.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been real fun.
All right. Well, take care and let's keep in touch.
Okie dokie. Thanks, Jonathan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody or you are somebody or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.